Welcome back. I'm Ray. This is Ollie.
And this is the only podcast that matters.
Isn't it, though?
It is. Isn't it,
I think so. Okay, we're back to do the second half of the Lou Reed and Velvet Underground episode.
Yes, we are.
Where we're mostly just going through the albums, but there's a little bit more to it.
Yeah, we're just going to talk about the 4 albums and kind of the overarching themes.
Technically 5.
Technically 5.
But we're going to get to that.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
But last time, if you haven't listened to the part 1 yet, they probably should do that before listening to this one, just in case you haven't.
Yeah.
Because we have some pretty juicy morsels in there.
Yeah. We're still figuring out our flow here.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
we gave a lot of good information.
Yes, we do.
And we had some fun.
And we're hilarious.
We're kind of funny. I'm like putting together reels to put on Instagram, and I'm like, which one of these 10 really good jokes do I post? I want to post the whole episode.
It's a terrible problem to have.
I know. It's like too much good content.
Okay, so last time we left off, we were kind of like with the band and how they formed and how they met, and kind of what they were doing before the recording of the first record. So we're going to talk about that first record right now, which was called The Velvet Underground and Nico.
And Nico.
I have to ask you, was the album cover just a metaphor for Andy's dick?
Basically. Or Lou Reed's, because he
Or Lou
was
Reed's.
in love with Lou Reed.
That's true. I never thought about it.
I know.
It could be Lou's
He
dick.
was like, because we talked a little bit last time, like Lou was kind of his teacher's pet. Not because Lou was trying to be.
Right.
But Andy was like infatuated with Lou, and even though nothing went down, it was openly like he
Yeah.
was like kind of in love with him
Right.
from the first moment. So like it's 100% an innuendo.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the fact that, do you want to talk about the album
Well, yeah. I mean,
cover?
just quickly at this point, if you're not familiar with it, you've seen it before. It's the banana.
Yeah.
And it's the Andy Warhol. Clearly, he did it.
It's one of Andy Warhol's most famous works of
Yes.
art, up there with like the Marilyn Monroe
Exactly.
and
The Campbell
Campbell's.
can. Yeah. Exactly.
And if you bought one of the original prints,
yeah.
it peeled off. The cover of the vinyl peeled off the banana, and then underneath it there was a pink banana.
It's like way too on the nose.
So on the nose.
Like the
Reel
metaphor
it
is so
in.
clear already.
I'm so happy I can't buy that one.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that if I buy this album, it will just be a yellow banana.
Yeah.
I don't want the peel off one. It's uncomfortable.
It's weird.
It's too much.
It's like when nobody needs to see a flesh-colored banana.
No, they're yellow for a reason.
Yeah, it's like an unsolicited dick pic.
It kind of is. if you bought that and you took it home and you unwrapped it and then you unpeeled it, like, would you feel a
You're
little?
like, excuse me, I didn't ask you to send me that.
Yeah.
Thanks
like
a lot,
little
Andy Warhol.
violent. Andy, you freak. Andy Warhol was he was all right, he pushed boundaries, which is one of the things that made him so valuable and
Yeah.
successful. But for me, this one is like
Leave it
a
be.
little much. Yeah.
So I was thinking, like, was the first album just really the Nico and Andy Warhol experience? Like, Lou Reed was such a control freak, right? And that kind of developed more as the albums came on. But, like, how did that manifest on this first record? What was you frustrated with on the first record?
At first record, Andy Warhol was really the one who was like, Nico has to be in this.
Yep.
And Paul Morrissey, who was a friend on the scene, was the one who credits himself for introducing Nico, which Lou would not say thank you for.
Right.
Neither would we.
Yeah.
Like, why would you take credit for that?
Yeah.
I would hide it.
I mean, it's probably the only thing he ever did that he can
Yeah.
kick into.
He also like was in love with her, as a lot of people.
A lot of people were.
We'll get into that.
Lou was,
For a minute.
yeah,
Bob
yeah.
Dylan.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll get into that.
Jim
Nico
Morrison.
a little bit, but it was basically like, we talked a little bit last time about Andy Warhol's role. So Andy Warhol created the album artwork. He like co-produced the album, even though he has no experience in a
name's
music
all
studio.
over it.
His name's all over it. He forces Nico in. He
Yeah.
makes them write songs for Nico. She does sing on a couple of them. Track 1 off their first album, Sunday Morning, was supposed to be sang by Nico. It was written for Nico to sing.
Yes.
Lou Reed gets in the studio that day and he's like, absolutely not.
F that noise.
Fuck that.
Yeah.
I'm singing it. He
And
demands
I
to
don't
sing
blame
it.
him. I don't blame him at all.
No, and it's a perfect song for him to sing.
Yeah.
I will say there are some songs. She gave voice to some of his female characters, and later
We
on,
talked
Mo
about
Tucker
this, right? We
will
talked
do
about
that
this
where
with,
he writes
Femme Fatale, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like he writes so many different points of views, and Mo Tucker and Nico, they serve a purpose to sing some of his female characters. But honestly, like I'm also fine with him singing his female characters himself too.
Yeah.
I actually don't need that. It's like it's cool.
Right.
It's an interesting thing to do.
We find
Is
out
it-
later in his solo career that he's so good at singing as a female character.
Yeah. He is.
But but Nico had to be part of it because what Andy Warhol saw was a bunch of ugly androgynous people in black sunglasses and was like,
She
I
was
can't
like a
market
model.
this. He's like, I need a German model.
Yeah.
Who can't really sing.
I will say a little bit about Nico. She's German born. She does modeling. She gets her own little bit of a music career going in Europe. She comes over here and she gets into the Velvet Underground. Like, I guess she's beautiful technically. Doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
But she's beautiful, like by
traditional standards.
Traditional standards. And I saw an interview, and I wish I remembered who said this, but somebody was like, she didn't speak English well. She didn't speak German well. German is her native language. German is her first language. And this man in this interview was like, she doesn't speak German well at all. And I was like, what does she do?
Yeah.
Well, she doesn't sing well. She doesn't like.
She just has. She must have had the je ne sais
She
quoi.
had,
Like
and then she was
that
a little
everybody
bit of
wanted to fuck her.
yeah.
And it's just like
She
some
dated
people
everyone.
have that.
She's gonna be in our Iggy Pop episode.
Yeah.
She's obviously in this episode. I would
Unfortunately.
never do an episode on Bob Dylan, but if we did, she would make an appearance in it. They had a little affair. It's like alleged that a couple of his songs were written about her. Can I tell you a weird fact before we move on from Nico? Because we don't
Okay.
really have to do a lot on her. She took her name from one of her lovers. She was dating a Greek.
What?
Yeah, isn't that weird? She was dating a Greek man whose first name was Nico, and then they broke
And she
up,
was like,
and she's like,
I'm gonna
I'm
just
Nico now.
Take that, yeah. I guess he really left a part of him inside of her. Anyway, enough about Nico.
We're done with Nico. Bitch. Okay, so the first album, I will say one thing that was detrimental about Andy Warhol's influence on this first album, which is a big reason why Lou was validated in getting rid of it. It was competitive, but it was valid. The album cover looked like an Andy Warhol ad.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't even find the name Velvet Underground on it in the first edition.
Exactly, yep.
It just said Andy Warhol.
Yep.
And so
And on the vinyl itself, it said it. And it,
yeah, and so it wasn't advertising the
band.
music at all. And they put up billboards, like ads around the city and stuff. And even those, it was like
Didn't say
in
it.
tiny little font, like the Velvet Underground by Andy Warhol. And so, like, as much as he put them on the map, it was also like no one knew that they were selling a band when they saw this ad. So
Exactly.
what good is that doing them?
Exactly.
And he just
And
Andy
Lou
Warhol
couldn't handle that. He was fed up with it.
Well, and Andy Warhol can't not take the spotlight, and Lou can't share the spotlight.
Yes.
So they were gonna have a very short stint together.
It was destined to happen.
Yeah. But they will go on to be, they have a split, and it's a hard split.
Yeah.
And it's not super amicable, but they will go on to speak very kindly
Both
of
of
each
them,
other
yeah.
over the
Over the
years.
years.
Even though it
They
wasn't
both
like,
say, I still care about this person. We just don't talk anymore.
yeah, which is like very
It's
mature.
very, it is very mature.
Yeah.
So the first album, you know, like nobody really bought it, and it was not a commercial success, and it was really just one of Andy Warhol's art pieces. That being said, fucking album slaps.
The album is so good.
It's so good.
It is interesting. My favorite songs are all off a different album, but if you ask me to think off the top of my head, what's my favorite Velvet Under? Like I would say the first album if I wasn't thinking about it.
Yeah, right.
It's such a good album. It's one of those albums, like I like to put it on. My favorite thing to do is when it's nice out, start that album when I start a walk and just walk for the
Let it-
length of
let
that
it
album.
ride,
And I
yeah.
feel like I am in a little movie when I do that.
It's
so
a very
cinematic.
it is an album in the traditional sense of the word. It's meant to all be together, which
Yes.
doesn't happen as much on the later records.
No, it's very cohesive. I have a little bit of a thing about Andy Warhol stuff.
Okay.
So before we move on from this album, Andy Warhol encouraged Lou Reed to write, especially Venus and Furs, but a couple of songs. He encouraged him to write with the paranoia that you experience from doing speed. And they were like all like speed freaks at the factory, and Lou
Right.
Reed was abusing every form of speed he could get. And Andy Warhol,
A-heads, as they called them back then.
that's what they called them.
Amphetamine heads.
I saw it referred to as like speed freaks a lot, which is
Yeah.
honestly like a great band name.
That is really good.
That should be a punk band.
Yeah.
That should be like a 1977 punk band. Anyway, so a lot of the songs that like they go from being like, if you listen to the album, Femme Fatale is like very pretty and like easy to listen to, and then the next song is Venus and Furs, and it's like uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's Andy Warhol kind of giving directive to Lou Reed to do that and like pull that out of him. So his influence, even though he's not like a producer of music, is in the songs in a direct way, which I do want to give him credit for. So one thing I want to say about the song, I'm Waiting for the Man.
Yeah.
Is that he says, I'm waiting for the man with $26 in my hand.
Yeah.
which I immediately paused and I'm like, that is not how much drugs cost.
Right, what drugs cost that?
Like, what drugs cost 20? You don't give a drug dealer a single.
No.
Unless you're giving him 10 singles.
Yeah.
And then what we learned was, well, what you learned.
Right, so he like apparently he was short $1 the last time he met the drug dealer. So this time he's uptown with $26 because he was short
He
one
owes
last
him,
time.
and he's a good man. He's a
Yeah.
man of his word. He's like, I owed
Yeah,
you
well, he
this
doesn't want
dollar.
to lose the plug. You know what I mean? He needs to
Yeah.
keep it.
And that's why he had $26.
And that's just the kind of realism that Lou put in his
That's so,
songs.
he's a good guy. He's a reliable person.
Oh man. Okay, so ready to move on to the second album?
Yeah.
What made this so different from the first album for you? Like, what stood out in terms of the album cover and then also the songs?
Okay, so every time they move further away from Andy Warhol's influence, they move less from that pop art sellable album cover to the point where it's maybe a little bit of a detriment to them that it's
Yeah.
not eye-catching, it's not like mainstream. So they start
Well,
going
to
a
be
little
fair,
bit.
if anybody else designs your album cover after Andy Warhol, it's not
Could be a
going to
flop.
look as nice.
Yeah. They went a little bit too like
Too much of-
high
yeah,
concept
overcompensated,
art.
yeah.
It's like kind of a small image. It's black and white. I think it's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I actually like this album artwork.
Better.
I like everything better than I like the banana because it had to be the banana. But then after that, I'm like, I'm glad we're done with the banana. So it is cool. I'm gonna say this album, they really give up the femme fatale on the Sunday morning and they really dive into the aggressive, distorted
Yeah.
stuff. I have a quote from Lou Reed that says, "It's aggressive, yes, but it's not aggressive bad. This is aggressive going to God."
Yeah, which is a crazy.
That's a crazy thing to say
It is like, who says something like that?
about yourself.
Lou Reed does.
Yeah, a Pisces.
I had this thought that were like songs like Sister Ray, which is on the second album, right?
Yeah.
Songs like Sister Ray literally could be a Stooges song, and I'm like, okay, cool. So maybe that's what's informing the Stooges a little
Oh,
bit.
interesting.
Do you
Thinking
know what I
ahead.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
because
there's an
really,
era.
It's really heavy and.
I'm glad you brought that up. As the years go on, not with this album, but by the third or fourth album, he starts doing something on stage that will inform Iggy Pop on stage.
Yeah.
He starts doing the thing where he's like running into the crowd, he's running around, he's screaming, he's like hitting a guitar, he's smashing on the drums. Like he starts behaving later on. He's playing it very cool early on, but there is a point where the drug use is more intense and they're on tour and he's unraveling a bit, where he starts behaving in a way that later Iggy Pop is known for, like
Yeah.
Iggy Pop's signature
Right,
stage
right.
presence. There's a moment where Lou Reed does that, and we know Iggy Pop was influenced by Lou Reed.
Right.
So it's interesting that you say that about the song. And Sister Ray is another example. It was about, quote, Lou Reed, a flamboyant black trans woman. And this is, again, him singing about sort of the underground queer scene that existed at the factory. He's no longer at the factory. Andy Warhol's factory is where they film, film a lot of movies, but
Right.
record their first album. This album, they're gone from the factory. They're not there anymore, but he will continue to sing about the people at the factory.
Which I don't blame him. It probably was a really interesting
So many
place.
good characters.
Yeah.
Every song that's like Lisa Says, Candy Says,
right.
Any song that has a woman's name in it, or a man's name sometimes, is about characters from the factory.
That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're all they're a series too. He says you know how he has multiple songs of like a woman's name says? Those are meant to be a series. There's a reason he names them all. Those things, like they
awesome.
they're like meant to be their own little collection.
Right.
This album, this is a fun fact, I don't know if you know, but you will love. Blondie, Debbie Harry,
Yeah.
who we both agree is tied for the hottest person to ever exist in the world,
Yeah.
will say that this album heavily influenced her more than any other album of that
Right.
time or from that band. Like this album, like if you love Blondie, say thank you to the second.
Right,
White
exactly.
Light, White Heat. Which did we say it's called White Light, White Heat?
Right.
Which is a great name
It
for a
is.
really distorted,
Right.
aggressive album.
White Light, White Heat is a reference to heroin.
Oh, which is so funny because he names a lot of things, songs and albums after heroin. So he's associated with being a heroin addict, even though
Yeah.
we covered this in last episode. He's mostly doing, it's not like he's not doing heroin.
Yeah.
Definitely shouldn't be.
But that's where that title comes from, is like the when you push the needle in, the
yeah,
white
the
light,
description
the
of
white heat. Yeah.
heroin. I guess he enjoys like writing about it more.
But he's not, he doesn't use heroin.
Ever.
Says him.
You didn't hear it from me. So I have a really funny review. Man, I don't have who wrote this review. This review says it's utterly pretentious, unbelievably monotonous, weirdo stuff, ruthless howling cry swirling up from bottomless neon depths of East Village speed dens and Jack Smith's transvestite orgies and the noise of nihilism.
Wow.
Which, just go put it on right now. That's
Yeah.
so true.
It is
that
what
was
it
meant
is.
to be slander, but I think like that
It's like a
describes it
glowing
in
review,
a way
yeah.
where a glowing review. Yeah, that's a great
That's
review
really
for an
funny.
album I love.
Yeah.
It was meant to trash.
I bet Lou Reed was like, fucking A right.
He probably was
Yeah.
like, they finally get me.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the press did not get him a lot.
I had something about the recording of this album, and that is the recording engineer, right? The person who actually presses the buttons in the studio. In the middle of Sister Ray gets up and walks out and says, I don't get paid enough to listen to this shit.
The thing is, you loved it or you hated it. It's
Yeah,
very
yeah.
divisive. I mean, they're a divisive band for the time, but this album especially is a divisive album for people who are like, I mean, think about what's on the radio at this time. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's a lot
You
of
don't get any
California
hits.
hippie bullshit.
Yeah.
as they would say.
and-
There is one thing that,
No.
one thing that happened in the studio during the recording of this album too, that it was the beginning of all four of them just starting to turn, or all three of them starting to turn their amps up because they didn't want to deal with each other. They were starting to already be contentious.
Yeah.
So that's why you get this sort of like breaking up sound that, again, the Stooges capitalized on.
Yes.
They're just like trying to be louder than each other.
Yeah, they're competing with
Right?
each other.
Yeah.
And this is where we're going to see Lou Reed start to slowly edge John Cale out more and more and more. Even though John Cale is responsible for so much of what's good about the Velvet Underground, and Lou Reed's solo career is different than the Velvet Underground for a reason. Like, John Cale was much more of a songwriter than I think people realize.
Yeah.
But he is starting actively throughout the recording of this album to really push John Cale to his
out.
edge until
he was
finally...
threatened by him.
He was threatened by him.
He didn't like that he was trying to share, that he had to share the spotlight with him.
Yeah.
So he starts to push him out.
Which, by the way, he didn't. The whole time John
Cale
Cale
was not interested in the
No,
spotlight.
the whole time John Cale's in the band, we're still all eyes on Lou Reed and Nico.
Yeah.
Like,
It's hard not to have your eyes on Lou Reed, though.
Yeah,
to,
because
like,
he's literally
yeah.
so cool. Like, he didn't have to be threatened
No.
at all. And he did it at the detriment to himself.
But you know what? I
because-
bet he wasn't threatened about the spotlight. I bet he just was, like, not okay with... so Lou Reed just wanted to write rock and roll songs. That's all he ever wanted.
Yeah.
And then I think during the second album, he started to be like, why are we still doing this droney bullshit?
You were
I'm
right.
trying to write these, like, garage rock
Yes,
songs.
yeah.
And John Cale's stepping on my fucking toes.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm glad I would have forgotten that point. He is like, at this point, like, we have gone too experimental. We've gone
Yeah.
too aggressive. During the album, he's doing it. But by the end of the second album, he is like, with the third album that we're about to go into, the third album, he's like, we are going back to pop.
Exactly.
We are reeling it in. We are
Exactly.
doing rock and roll. He wants to make a hit. So I think by the end of the second album, he's sick of Cale, and he's sick of Cale's avant-garde experimental
Yeah.
style, and he kicks him out just as much because of the direction he wants to go into,
Right.
as much as sharing the spotlight.
Exactly.
That's a really good point.
But ultimately, he is a control freak, like we mentioned
Yeah.
before. Yeah. And that is
Yeah.
one of the ways it manifests on this record.
And like, we're just gonna keep seeing him do that.
Anything
throughout
else
the
you want
years.
to add about number 2?
No, I think that's like the most important stuff about it to me. I think like I read a really great book. If you want more details, you know what I mean.
What's
But,
the name
like,
of the book that you read?
Oh, just called Lou Reed. It's somewhere over here. It's just called
Yeah.
Lou Reed. I'll post it.
We'll post a picture of it on the Instagram.
Can I tell you the funniest thing that's ever happened to me in terms of reading?
What?
I bought a book on the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed that was like utter nonsense.
Oh
There's-
my God, you'd mentioned this.
were named such ridiculous things, and they just dropped and started sentences at random, and they would say things completely out of context, and I would be like, who are we talking about? And it was so nonsensical, and I was like, I felt like I was on drugs.
Right.
And then I got this book. This other self-published book was just copying and pasting parts of this book that I actually ended up reading.
That's ridiculous.
It copied all the chapter names. I would read this book and I'd be like, oh, that's who they were talking about. They cut out the first 3 sentences of this paragraph and just started talking about his aunt, but didn't say it was his aunt. Like, it was so nonsensical. It was like it was chopped up and pasted together. And it was just a direct ripoff, poorly constructed, of this other great
of
book
the
I
licensed
found.
book, yeah.
Which happened to be the second one
Right.
I looked into.
That's really funny.
I'm going to post both of them and like maybe some clips comparing them.
Okay, so the third album, How did Lou respond to the criticism in the press about the second album? Like, how was his songwriting different? We touched on this a little bit, but can you just elaborate on that? Just a little bit?
So Kale is still in this one, by the way.
Yes.
But he's barely hanging on.
But I don't think he finishes the recording project.
And then he's out. I think what I know is that he was going for more radio-friendly songs.
Yeah.
And this album is going to give us Pale Blue Eyes, which is, if you look at Spotify today, his most played song. There have been times where I listen to nothing but that song
It's
all
so soothing
day.
and comforting.
It's so
and
sweet. It's so catchy. He really does write a pop hit and a very like sentimental.
And a great example of Mo Tucker's simplicity and how powerful it is. Just a tambourine.
Just a tambourine
Boom.
for like 2.5 minutes.
And she can do it. She doesn't.
It's really hard. It's really hard to just
Yeah.
do one tambourine at the same pace to keep time. It's
Perfectly
harder.
in time. Yeah.
Yeah, she nails it. So he's going like, we're done with the fuzz and feedback. We're done with being aggressive. He's like ready to make a pop hit. It is a little bit credited to the fact that they were traveling and touring for the last album, or traveling to the new studio. And all of their like amps and pedals and stuff got stolen at the airport.
I didn't know that.
So
like, I guess we can't do the distorted stuff.
Sterling Morrison, the guitar player, still at this point, Sterling Morrison has been on all the albums at this point. He will say, he's like, yeah, we were doing a 180 degree from White Heat on purpose. We were 100% turning completely around. But also, we didn't have our pedals anymore, so we couldn't use them.
Yeah.
So we're like, well,
I mean, you work with what you got, I guess.
Buy more? No,
Yeah.
we're just gonna not have them
But
anymore.
it probably wouldn't have been quite as sweet and clean sounding if it weren't for that particular fact, right?
Yeah. So my two favorite songs are on this album. And like, I feel like if I tell you what they are, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, it checks out.
Mm-hmm.
So my favorite is What Goes On and The Murder Mystery.
Oh, the Murder Mystery is so good.
It's so good, and
Yeah.
it's a very unique song.
It really
and
is.
at the end, it's Cale and Reed both reading like completely different parts
yeah.
at the same time.
Right, over each other.
Over each
Yeah.
other, which is like so them. That's
Yeah.
so their relationship. That they're both of those parts are so good.
Yeah.
And completely unrelated.
But it's hard to like separate them a little
Yeah,
bit.
like you can only listen to one thing at a time. It's like such a good. That song is such a good metaphor for how they wrote together
Exactly.
and competed with each other, and they were
Exactly.
doing like two different things that work together.
But
like,
so separately.
that's a song like I wish I wrote.
That's totally.
Yeah.
I get jealous of certain songs
Me too. Both of them, What Goes On and The Murder Mystery and Femme Fatale and Pale Blue Eyes.
Right.
I mean, I think those are my top 4.
Pale Blue Eyes is it's like a really, I didn't know that was his top played song, but that does make sense.
So when I talk about people's most popular songs, I'm basically going off what's on Spotify today,
right.
because that generally reflects the hits of all time. And I don't have the ability to be like, in 1989 this was 3 on the Billboard Top
Right.
100. Like,
and the single wasn't always their most popular song.
No, yeah. So I'm going off. If you look at Spotify today, if you look at
Right.
the Velvet Underground, it's Pale Blue Eyes, and like that makes perfect sense. So that's what this and then on this album, the self-titled, by the way, Lou will say that Candy Says is the best song he ever wrote.
Okay.
Like later in his life, after his solo career, after Transformer,
saying something, yeah.
after Walk on the Wild Side, all that stuff, he will.
I have to agree with that, I guess.
You think so?
Over Walk on the Wild Side for sure. Yeah.
He says Candy Says is the best song he ever wrote. Like in retrospect, not even at the time.
Well, you know what? That's funny. Now that you bring that up, like, how did like his views on the spectrum of sexuality and love kind of manifest in that song a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And like sort of throughout the record as well, right? Like he does talk a lot about, like I said, the spectrum of sexuality, and because he was like tapped into all of it.
Another song about a trans woman from the
Right.
factory.
Right.
And then Some Kind of Love is also on this album, and others, like there are reviews that will call this like his queerest song, which is like, it's hard to pick a queerest song from a queer artist who like only sang about
Queer people.
rock and roll
Yeah.
and queer people. But people will say Some Kind of Love, which is a little on the nose. It's like all love is love.
Yeah, right.
And it is sort of an anthem for that. So I guess like it is, more of an anthem for queer people than his other songs. But I don't think you can say like this song's his gayest song.
Yeah, that's a weird thing
We
to
could
say.
say what's his least gay song.
What is
at
his
best.
least gay song?
I'll let you know if he comes out with one.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I haven't come across it. I just think in theory there could be. Everything
You'll
is
let me
a
know if he
spectrum.
posthumously writes a not gay song.
I just think everything is a spectrum, so
Yeah.
it must exist. I
Yeah,
don't know
yeah.
what it is.
Exactly.
It's just
Yeah.
there should be one.
Yeah, there should be one.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And then the only other thing I want to talk about is between the second album and third album, they release an album called VU, which is a bunch of songs that didn't make the cut for other albums. And on this album, the two songs I want to talk about is one, Andy's Chest, which is more evidence that he thinks very highly and with kindness about Andy even after their split. Infamously, Andy Warhol was shot, and it would affect his health for the rest of his life.
Yeah. He had to wear like pretty much like a thing holding his insides
like
in.
holding his organs together, like a brace holding his organs.
And he was shot
in
by
place.
a fan who she tried to get him to produce her screenplay.
Yeah, basically like a person
And
who
he wouldn't do it, and then he lost the only copy of the screenplay.
That's so funny. I didn't know that
And
part.
so she shot him.
I didn't know that it was because he lost the only copy. That would piss me off.
That would piss me off too.
Yeah, but Andy's Chest is a very sweet song. That's specifically about that. And then the other one I want to talk about on that release, it's not really a studio album like the others, but I'm Sticking With You.
Oh, that's a great song.
Sang by Mo Tucker primarily in the beginning, and then the two of them. I just want to draw attention to that song. It's so sweet. I'm so glad he let Mo sing on that one. It's hard for him to give up control and give up the vocals to other people. It's perfectly written for her, high register, and she's just so sweet.
She has a sort of childlike way of singing, right? A little bit.
It's very much reminds me of what I like about Kim Deal's vocals for the Pixies, where it's like pretty and well developed, but very much cute and youthful at the same time. It's like doing so much at the same time. And I just want to draw attention to that song because I just think it's such a great representation of a Velvet Underground song.
That's fair.
Of different people doing different things. And he can
great
write,
point.
like, for as aggressive as he gets, he writes some of the cutest songs you've ever heard in your life.
Yeah, he does.
And that's one of them.
Yeah. So at the end of the third album, John Cale is totally out.
Yeah.
So like, how did that come about? Like, what happened that led to that sort of the final straw?
Well, I know that this has been building for
3 albums.
3 albums, more and more and more, to the point where, like, I think, like, John Cale was probably primed to walk away anyway, but Lou went about it by having the other bandmates sit down with him and tell him. Lou didn't even fire him with his chest out, which is, like, that's a bummer to me.
He did what Lou does best, and he delegated.
True. He delegated
But in a really
while it was still
awful
about
way.
him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he had Sterling Morrison and Mo Tucker break the news, which puts them in an uncomfortable position. Was probably
terrible.
better at breaking it to him than Lou would have been. I also think you should do things with your chest. And so it bums me out a little bit that he was a little bit coward about it.
Yeah.
But it was also, he probably would have been mean. Maybe
Yeah.
he knew his limits too.
I think John Cale could have taken it. John Cale had enough poise and confidence to handle it, but he went on to do such amazing things in music. Some of his solo music is some of my favorite music ever. So he did.
John Cale was amazing.
He did,
and he would go
did
on to
have an
work with
amazing
Nico
solo
again,
career,
which
exactly.
is like, I don't love Nico, but John Cale would go on to work with her in a way that obviously elevated her music that she would do.
That's not hard.
It wasn't going to be good without him.
Yeah.
I have one thing. Lester Bangs, that we've talked about before,
Yes.
who's a writer in the scene, has specifically, he has a complicated relationship with Lou Reed. I know we've talked about Lou at the press, but Lou and Lester specifically have a relationship that does not end well by the end of his careers.
Right.
But at this point, Lester Bangs is still writing in his camp. And he writes of this album, how do you define a group like this who moved from heroin and Jesus in 2 short years? Can this be the same bunch of junkie, faggot, sadomasochistic speed freaks who roared their anger and their pain into storms of screaming feedback? Yes, it can. And perhaps the most important lesson of the VU, the power of the human soul to descend its darker levels.
Ooh, that's really good. He's such a good writer.
He's a really good writer.
Yeah.
That's
I like when people
why
write
he's
things
going to
that-
get
yeah.
a little mini episode, I think.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Because he has some of the best quotes about some of the best albums of
Yeah.
all time. But yeah, he's like,
Maybe we should just feature a Lester Bangs quote in every episode.
oh, that'd be like a Lester,
Yeah.
like
The Lester Bangs of today.
the day.
Okay, so the 4th album we talked about last episode is my favorite.
I know, which is not what I would have guessed, but at the same time, checks out for you. Like, which I mean complimentary.
right. Yeah,
I'm like,
no.
yeah, I get you.
So how did John Cale and Mo Tucker's absence? Okay, because we should say Mo Tucker was pregnant during the recording session.
Mo Tucker is pregnant, so she is the only person that leaves not because she was edged out.
I think he took advantage of her pregnancy to push her out because she was Team Cale.
Oh, yeah, well, because
yeah.
she was like the middleman between the two of them
Totally.
because Lou confided in her and she had the ability to sort of bring him down and calm him down and let him vent.
Yeah, she did.
But she
they had
was,
a really special relationship.
They did have a special, but that being said, she didn't encourage his treatment of John Cale either. She didn't condone the way they competed with each other. She played until she was so pregnant she couldn't physically play anymore.
Right.
She really stuck with the band as long as she could. And then he replaces her and this
with
album.
4 different sessions. It takes 4 session drummers to
because we talked about this in the first
duplicate her.
episode. It's very hard to do Mo Tucker because she could nail simplicity. She brought that Western African influence that nobody else had at the time. And there was something about, as simplistic as it was, like, I don't know why her just hitting a tambourine for a whole song is better than other people just hitting a tambourine for a whole song. Just Mo Tucker magic.
They had to go through. They took 4 different people to do what she did.
Yeah,
So.
in the whole album.
Why was it called Loaded? Why did they name it that?
Oh, I don't have that.
Okay, so they named it Loaded because, well, there was like 2 different reasons for it, but Lou said that he named it Loaded because it was literally loaded with radio hits. Like, that was the whole point of it.
That's perfect.
Was that he
is.
like wanted to be loaded with.
Yes, I actually did come across that and I didn't write it down. That's so good.
And at this point, Lou just had songs and wanted session players. That he was being so in control that he's like, I wrote these songs, just play them the way I tell you to play them.
Well, this is also when Doug Yule enters the picture.
And his brother too, right? He plays drums with them.
Yes,
Billy,
but Yule's vocals are going to be on like 4 of the hits.
My favorite one,
Your
Oh, Sweet
favorite,
Nothing.
Oh Sweet Nothing, Who Loves the Sun, Lonesome Cowboy, New Age. He does, as Lou Reed, like Lou Reed during this album starts to himself separate from the band and starts to like lose interest and like he almost kicks the band out.
He kicks himself out of the band.
And Doug Yule will become more and more of a presence as by the time this album is done recording, Lou is done with the band.
Yeah.
But it's, of course, because the original members of the band are all gone anyway.
Right. Is Sterling gone too at this point?
Sterling is gone. During this album, Sterling goes back to college.
Oh, I love
so
that
he
for him.
starts the album and then is like, this is not what I need at this point in my life. Tries to do both at the same time. Really like has to put himself first. So he leaves during the album. Yule gradually takes over more and more throughout the album. By the end of the album, Lou is done. Mo's gone. John Cale's gone. And so, like, it's really interesting because it's, like, the last hurrah.
Yeah.
And Lou wrote some bangers on his way out the door.
Rock and Roll and Sweet Jane
Yeah,
are
Sweet
literally
Jane is-
staples of rock and roll.
If you are at the bar of old people reading like I do, like the bar I go to where old people interrupt my reading, and somebody's like, oh, you're reading about Lou Reed? All the old guys go, oh, Sweet Jane. That recording of Sweet Jane with that solo, like that's the old guys' favorites.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a great song.
It's a great song.
It's one of those ones that gets played so much that I'm like, eh.
Yeah.
But then you like listen to it, you try to listen to it with fresh ears and you're like, holy fucking shit.
Yeah, if you heard it the first time today, you're like, would it be my favorite? Like,
Rock and Roll might be
maybe.
the coolest song. It might be the
Yes.
coolest song he wrote.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it's just a cool fucking
It's
song.
very cool. Like Walk on the Wild Side. Like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
the coolest song ever. We're not going to talk about his solo career because, like we said, for the sake of this being a podcast about punk, we're talking about the proto-punk band.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody in an interview was like, why don't you why don't you write another Walk on the Wild Side? Why don't you turn? And he's like, I don't know how I did that.
Yeah.
Like I just
You
did
can't
it.
replicate
Like,
it. It just
yeah,
happened.
It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. If I had a different cup of coffee that morning, it would have been a
Right.
different song.
Right, that's
like I
funny.
just sat down and wrote that song one day, and I'm not going to be able to do it ever again because I'm not going to be in that moment ever again. He's like, you think I like wrote a hit on purpose and don't write other hits on purpose?
Right.
He's like, think I'm withholding hits from you guys? Like, you're like, I don't.
I'm not keeping them in my back pocket.
Yeah, he's like,
you get them when I get them.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know how to make another Walk on the Wild
Exactly.
Side, or I would be happy to.
Right, exactly.
Like, I would like that more than you.
Hey, that's funny.
And this is the tour where he's becoming even more like that Iggy Pop persona I talked about
Yeah,
earlier.
right, exactly.
This Loaded tour is when he is being like losing his mind on stage, having
So this
to,
is 1970, right?
this is
does that sound
1970. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is like the era, like the 70s is like the most, like the punk decade more than anything else to me.
Yeah.
Like the
No, of
early to
course.
mid to late 70s
course, yeah.
is like all, I mean, we both love 1977 specifically.
So during this tour, they come back to Max's Kansas City, the club in New York City, and they perform as this new lineup, right?
Yes.
And for the first time, it's they sound like just a punk band.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, they sound like something that's well received. I think because people can figure out what they are.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? In the past, they were doing
Totally,
like,
yeah.
it's
more
new things
one-dimensional.
that
Yeah.
hadn't been done before. And this, he really honed in and was like, this is rock and roll. He understood how to make something wild and crazy from that experiment. He understood how to make something a little more like reel it in, a little more pop, a little more radio from those experiments. And like, I feel like he found the balance in this last album on his way out the door. He found a balance of writing songs that like encapsulated all of the best of that stuff and the different phases they went through.
Put, yeah.
And I think like maybe the reason some of these songs are so good and like some of your favorites is because it's like he had gone through these different phases and taken what worked the best from each album before. And he has said, like we said in the first episode, that all of his albums in this band and his solo stuff are meant to be heard in order, like chapters of a novel. And this is like his last chapter of the Velvet Underground novel. And he just ends on a really powerful note.
Yeah.
And I think the audience is seeing this and they can grasp what it is. Like they can wrap their heads around what it is.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
And I've always been like, just to hate on myself a little bit, I've always had simple taste. And so that makes sense why like the fourth album to me is just, it is what it is and I can understand it and it just makes sense to me. So totally,
right.
just to that
How
point.
In what way do you think you have simple taste? I wouldn't have said that about you.
I don't know, like, I'm not the kind of person that, how do I say this? Like, it takes me a while to understand certain music and I have to be almost forced to listen to it a bunch of times.
Oh, yeah, I get that.
If I don't
sometimes.
get something on the first or second or third listen, it's like, it's surprising if I keep on going.
Right,
Do you know what I mean by that?
I'm that way to a certain degree, but if I commit to like learning a discography, I will push through it.
For instance, with Radiohead, the girl I was dating at the time, if she hadn't kept playing fucking Radiohead over and over again, I probably wouldn't be a Radiohead fan. But it just kept on happening. Finally I was like, oh my God, I fucking get it.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of what I mean.
Can
by
we talk about a bit that I have that I'm just never gonna do stand up, so I'm just gonna do it here right now? You stop and think about the fact that Tom York says, "I want a perfect body." Can you picture Tom York with like
just like ripped and still
like,
with like the eye?
magazine.
He still has the eye thing, but like the body is perfect.
Face, but he's like on the cover of whatever that men's magazines with a
Men's
perfect
Health.
body. Men's Health is like ripped Tom York. I know what he means. I know when you listen to that lyric that he means it in a different way, but all I can picture every day, like I really want to Photoshop.
Yeah, just like a crude Photoshop of Tom York's head on like a weightlifter.
Yeah.
We should do that.
Yeah, Tom York wants a perfect body. I laugh I can't even listen to that song.
Oh man, that's really funny.
Ever since I came up with that bit.
I can't listen to that song anymore either.
Sorry. I hope I didn't ruin it for you.
No, it's been ruined for years.
Okay.
I bet they can't listen to it either. I think they hate that song.
Yeah, probably.
Anyway.
Last thing, I don't know what you have on this album, but I want to say this is when a young Jonathan Richman, who is going to get an episode, Jonathan Richman, The Modern Lovers,
Yes.
he will get an episode when that career starts. Jonathan Richman is the biggest fanboy, the Velvet, and they have fanboys.
It's so cute.
It's adorable.
He's so excited
the
about
biggest
them.
fanboy, and they're actually maybe uncharacteristically sweet to him.
Yeah.
And Lou actually
but
takes
if
him under
you
his
listen to
wing.
him talk about it, you could never be mean to Jonathan. He's like so endearing.
Cute. He's a teenager.
Yeah.
And Lou kind of takes him under his wing, lets him backstage.
And Sterling Morrison too teaches him how to play.
And lets him like do his songs for them and gives them feedback on his songs. Lets them open a couple of times.
It's insane.
It's adorable. Jonathan Richman is the most doe-eyed fan ever. It's so cute, and he's a nice guy. Like I've seen him perform, and he's just a likable guy.
He is super
he's just
sweet.
like a sweet, easygoing guy. He's funny.
Mm-hmm. And the Modern Lovers just basically become like a carbon copy of Velvet Underground in Boston.
Yeah, they become like a later Boston
Velvet
version,
Underground.
Velvet Underground. They're so similar.
Yeah.
They go very well together on a playlist.
Yeah.
And it's primarily, I think, the first and fourth album more than the others
Yeah,
go
absolutely.
well with like Jonathan Richman's songs. But when we get to an episode on Jonathan Richman, like we cannot overstate how much he is completely, not even influenced, but like informed by the Velvet Underground.
Yeah. And so open about his love for them, which is it's really cute.
And I love when somebody unapologetically says, like, I'm just trying to be, like Kurt Cobain is like, I'm just trying to be the Pixies.
Yeah.
He's like, every interview you've seen him in, he's like, yeah, I just want to be the Pixies.
I feel like he liked the Breeders more.
Oh, he doesn't say that.
He
but
said
like,
that. What's the Pod? Is that the name of the
Interesting.
Breeders album? What's his favorite record?
Yeah, so this is when, by the end of this, Rita's done, Sterling Morrison pulls back, It's basically a Doug Yule album by the time they're done recording process. And that leads us to what is technically a 5th studio album in that it's named the Velvet Underground. But I could never consider it. And growing up, I didn't know that. I didn't know that Squeeze was it was Doug Yule and studio musicians.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. It's also 3 years after their 4th album. It's somebody just trying to make money, just cash in, like somebody trying to produce an album.
They probably owed the label an album.
Like an album, yeah. And it was always my least favorite album by far, to the point where I don't even listen to it. And I never really knew
that's why.
Because and then I was oh, it's literally not a Velvet Underground. Like, okay, I was so right.
Yeah, totally.
I was so right for that. I really validated
you nailed it.
me hating that album and like never spending any time on it. Because there's no Cale, no Morrison, no Tucker, no Reed.
Yeah.
It's studio musicians and Doug Yule.
And Doug Yule's great, but he can't write the song.
And it's literally considered by most just a Doug Yule solo album, which is what it should have been called.
Good for him for somehow managing to put out a solo album under the name Velvet Underground.
that was
good on you, Doug Yule.
I have one quote about Lou Reed that I want to say before we're done, because this is about him in the Velvet Underground. And when he goes on to this solo career, this will always be true of him. But Sterling Morrison said, Lou was always trying to move mentally and spiritually to some place where no one had ever gone before. And we see that through all of these albums we talked about. He goes through different phases. He pushes himself into different styles. And he'll go on to do this for the rest of his career. And I would encourage you to go listen to his solo stuff. Yeah. I think we both agree Transformers is one of the best albums.
Throughout his entire life, he kept on putting out amazing music.
Yeah.
He didn't stop pushing himself. He didn't stop sounding like Lou. He didn't stop being himself.
That's the thing. He is always authentic to himself and always pushing himself at the same time.
It's a pretty hard thing to fucking do.
And Lou Reed does that, not just in the Velvet Underground, but for quite a few albums in his solo career after that.
I do have one final thing to say about the Velvet Underground.
Okay.
They're rough around the edges, out of tune. They aren't pretty. They didn't sell a lot of records. Really, nobody knew about them. But like the thing is, like, they don't need to be popular for you to know about them. You love them. You love them for all those above reasons, right?
Yes.
I love them for all those above reasons.
Yeah.
So it's easy to create like a really intimate relationship with it when it feels like just yours.
Yeah.
Right? We know this about like, oh, I knew them before, I knew them when. Velvet Underground has this sort of infinite ability to be that band. You mentioned one thing earlier, like that's something that you did that you would recommend that everybody would do, and that is,
I think there's no better artist than Lou Reed to read along the lyrics while you listen to it. There's a lot of bands I like that have super good lyrics by very good writers, but like this, like, and because sometimes they sound very simple too, but that was his goal. But I think like out of any artist ever, if I was gonna say like read along while you listen to every single song at least once, just at least once. Every Lou Reed song, it's a lot of songs. Yeah. Just at least once, like read along, and I do it on the treadmill all the time. I was getting ready for this episode, and I was listening to nothing but the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed for like 2 weeks straight before our first episode. I'd be on the treadmill on a full incline, and it's just a great distraction.
Or like a teleprompter of Lou Reed lyrics.
Well, because if you do it on Spotify, they just scroll
they
up.
do just scroll. Yeah,
so it literally is like a teleprompter, and
teleprompter.
I'm just like listening. Yeah, I think it's a great band to do that for. I don't even think you really understand the Velvet Underground if you haven't like read the Velvet Underground. Walk on the Wild Side too, like his solo stuff. Like I really recommend reading it.
I love that.
Yeah. I also do this for a lot of bands, but this is if I had to say to do this
you
with any band.
You have to pick one to get super obsessive with the lyrics about. I love it.
Lou Reed.
He was a writer originally. So
I know. I can't stress that enough.
So this has been the only podcast that matters. Thank you for listening. This was all about Lou and the Velvet Underground.
I will come back with another mini episode, and then we're going to do our next deep dive. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And if you didn't like it,
get your own fucking
podcast.
Peace.
Peace.